All right. Well, happy to be joined by Carl Williams. Carl writes cutting-edge articles on subjects ranging from climate change and quantum computing to artificial intelligence and nanotechnology. He has published work for Nature, the Royal Institution of Australia, the Australian National Data Services, and many others. He also writes independent, industry-leading content about global mining and mineral explorations for the Northern Miner, and specializes in covering technology developments in the sector. Previously, Carl helped organizations manage the risks and opportunities from climate change, assisting governments and business in Europe, North America, India, and Australasia. Carl, it's wonderful to see you. How have you been keeping?
I'm very well, Anthony. How are you?
I'm doing well. Carl, are you joining us from California?
Not quite, nearly. On the brink of having to pop back to Paris, of all places, to get our visa applications in at the American consulate there. So okay. My wife, should I say, rather, is Parisian, so we have to do everything there.
Oh, I see. Okay, so lots of interesting times in the Williams household these days.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is.
Excellent. Well, listen, I'll pass it over to you. You can begin the introductions of your panelists. We look forward to this one. Thanks, Carl.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anthony. Good morning, everybody. Well, we've got a fascinating discussion today. Rare earth elements, a group of 70 metallic elements that are really critical to the modern world and global efforts to decarbonize world economies. We've heard quite a bit about that this morning with the Symposium, and it'll be an ongoing feature for decades to come, I would imagine. We're privileged to have three experts joining us today to provide some insights into the availability of these rare earth elements, the supply chains around them, and the markets for REEs. Firstly, we have Clint Cox joining us from Chicago. Chris is the founder of the Anchor House, an investment advisory firm specializing in the rare earth elements market. Clint founded the Anchor House in 1995 and is focused on enhancing the understanding of this often opaque market and worked with a variety of clients throughout the RE supply chain. Clint has a BA in English from Colgate University, so I'm sure he's going to correct any of my grammar today. Next, we have Chris Glow joining us from London. Welcome, Chris. Chris is the president of Commerce Resources, an exploration and development company with a particular focus on deposits of REEs, and it advances the country's Ashram rare earth and Fluorspar project in Quebec. Try saying that with after a wee dram. And it's Upper Fur Tantalum and Niobium deposit at Blue River in British Columbia. And by no means least, I think we have Mark joining us at the moment, or soon anyway. I'll give Mark the introduction. Mark Chalmers. Mark is the president of CEO of Energy Fuels, a role he has had since 2018, after joining company as the president and chief operating officer in 2016. Energy Fuels is a leading US producer of uranium and is a major US producer of vanadium and an emerging player of the commercial rare earth elements business, and is also helping to reestablish a fully integrated supply chain in REs in the US. So Mark will give a unique perspective on the reestablishment of these critical metals into the North American markets. A warm welcome to you all. It's a pleasure to have you joining us on this, the last of this year's Global Mining Symposium, the Northern Miner. I think before we jump in there, gentlemen, to discuss these fascinating elements, it might be worth just giving a quick 101 on what REEs are. We talk a lot about them, but what exactly are they? Well, as I mentioned earlier on, there are about 17 metallic elements, 15 of which belong to the lanthanide group, plus scandium and yttrium. They're not even the term, they're called rare earth elements, but it is something of a misnomer that, because they're actually not that rare. Even the rarest rare earth element, thulium, is about 120 times more common than gold. And even the least rare earth element is cerium, and that's about 15,000 times more abundant than gold. So to call them rare may be something misnomer. However, they are rare in the sense that what mineralogists they're called dispersed. It basically means they've actually found, but not in high concentration. So they're wildly dispersed over the planet. So hence the term where rare comes from. So firstly then, why are these elements so important? Clint, I'm going to throw this question at you, if that's okay. They've been designated critical or strategic minerals by a lot of Western countries in particular. Why are they so critical? Why are they so strategic?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, Carl, and thanks, Anthony and Laura, for having us on. And yeah, I mean, I guess from my view, since I've been in the industry for a while, I've gotten to see how really critical these applications are for rare earths, such as your cell phone. So, you know, every cell phone that's out there will be using rare earths for the vibration device, for the speakers, for the camera lens. It's all going to be using rare earths for the phosphors. So that's just rare earths that you carry in your pocket. When you get in your car and you drive somewhere, most automotive, most cars that are out there will have somewhere between 150 and 200 rare earth magnets. So that's for everything from windshield wipers, the seats, the mirrors, all those things where, applications where something's moving, that's going to be a rare earth motor derived from permanent magnets. Then you have aerospace, you have catalysts, you have lasers, super alloys. Pretty much every defense system, every weapon system, every transportation system in defense utilizes rare earths in some way, shape, or form. I mean, basically, if you just think about what's made our society smaller, lighter, faster, stronger, that's pretty much all rare earths. That's what's helped enable that. So when you look at the rare earth market, it's small. It's about $5 to $10 billion, but it directly impacts somewhere around $5 to $10 trillion in global GDP. So it's really got an outsized impact. And that's why I think, countries are looking at this and saying, okay, these are critical, these are strategic. We should start highlighting this and maybe ensuring better, availability of rare earths globally.
Fantastic. That's a great introduction for that. Many thanks, Clint. Chris, I'd like to come to you now. As really the only dedicated RE rare earth element miner on the panel here, I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about RE rare earth elements. I'll avoid the acronym because it's something of a mouthful. Rare earth elements. Could you maybe talk about the deposits, where they're mainly found, how are they mined? Any insights you can give as the real RE miner here?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Carl. It's a pleasure to be here again. And thank you, Anthony and Laura, for organizing this. It was great to see you, Tony, in Vancouver. In terms of the key reason that rare earth elements are truly called and accurately called rare, it comes down to economics. At the end of the day, it's not so much how much they are dispersed. It's specifically about which minerals these rare earth element deposits are hosted in. As Candace McPherson earlier talked about massive sulfide nickel deposits, in terms of nickel, you have really two styles of deposits. You have laterites and you have massive sulfides. Well, anybody with a brain would rather find a new Voisey's Bay or a new Raglan instead of a new lateritic nickel deposit, where essentially your operating costs are going to be extremely problematic. That same principle is true in rare earth elements, but magnify it by approximately 100 times. So in terms of rare earth elements, in terms of how they are abundant in the Earth's crust, the reality is economics. At the end of the day, nobody gets into mining because it's fun per se. They get into mining because they want to make money at it. In terms of rare earth elements, where they can be hosted by over 150 different minerals, out of that number, there are only 4 that are commercially processed today. And so of that 4, they are in reverse order: loperite, xenotime, bastnäsite, and monazite. And monazite is arguably exponentially more important today, specifically because of what Clint touched on just a minute ago. Monazite-hosted deposits have the greatest distribution of these specific 4 rare earth elements that are essential for the manufacture of permanent magnets. Then in terms of deposit types, you have over 80% of rare earth elements from hard rock carbonatite-hosted sources. And the rest of the 20% is made up of essentially primarily ionic clay deposits. And those are very different deposits that don't specifically have the rare earth elements in minerals per se. And those deposits are generally heap leached. something that could be said at this point in time is essentially kudos to Beijing in this regard, in that Beijing has fairly quietly been shutting down excessively, egregiously polluting deposits, and that is either hard rock or ionic clay deposits, especially the ionic clay deposits in the South China area. Ironically or not, one of China's bigger feedstock sources, though, is right across the negligible border, southern border with Myanmar, where in Myanmar, they do the same kind of heap leaching operations that they used to do abundantly in the South China area. At any rate, with over 80% of all rare earth elements produced from carbonatite-hosted sources, one would hope that more companies focused on carbonatites as well. Just a brief mention of carbonatites. These are volcanic deposits that come up from deep in the Earth's crust. And so typically in terms of carbonatites, in the best case scenario, you will find enormous amounts of resources. The world's largest rare earth element producer is Bayan-Obo in Baotao, China. That is a carbonatite. No one really knows how much material is there because it goes down for hundreds of meters. And so it could keep on producing 45% of the world's supply of rare earth elements for, no one really knows, generations, basically.
Fantastic, Chris. That's a fantastic overview rather of the availability there. And I guess from some of your comments there, most of the rare earth elements at the moment that they're sourced are in what we say they're sourced in jurisdictions that have, say, challenges. Is that maybe the best way of describing it?
Well, the majority of production is still from China. I mean, Bayan-Obo itself accounts for approximately 45% of production, and you have the other Sichuan producers, Weishan, Maoping in China. So, you know, Clint would probably have a better percentage figure of how much material China produces. As well, on this point, though, China has the biggest downstream market for manufacturing from rare earth elements, which has then led to the odd situation where China is actually a net importer of rare earth elements because of their largest downstream market for the rare earth elements. And so China is currently importing material from Myanmar, Vietnam, North Korea, the United States, MP Materials at this point in time, until MP Materials is actually successful in processing their own material internally, and then Linus out of Australia. It's not so much, I mean, friendly jurisdictions, non-friendly jurisdictions. Certainly that is something that governments talk about, the United States especially, you know, in terms of wanting to reduce or arguably completely eliminate dependency upon China, as that is certainly seen as a fundamental vulnerability that is arguably untenable in most Americans' minds. And as Clint said, defense systems, I mean, you know, europium is essential for missile guidance systems. You know, do you really want to keep on depending upon a country that you may not be as friendly with for these resources of rare earth elements?
Yeah, absolutely. Great point to end that on there, Chris. Thank you. Mark, I see you joined us now. Thank you for welcome this morning, Mark, as well. Mark, I'd like to maybe address this next question yourself. As Energy Fuels is primarily uranium vanadium producers, but you are these rare earth elements are often found, as Chris alluded to there, with these minerals as well. I wonder if you could speak to your experience of processing rare earth elements from monazite sands, maybe some of the challenges around the radioactivity that comes from uranium, and obviously that has implications for ESG objectives as well.
Yeah, Carl. Let me get my video going here. Our business plan is different than others. I mean, actually, we're replicating what the Chinese are doing with monazite sands in China, but doing it in the United States at developed country standards. But look at, as far as in our case, we're basically retrofitting a uranium mill that has all the licenses and infrastructure in place to deal with the radionuclides, the uranium, thorium, and being able to process the monazite. So the challenge are not high for us because we're used to dealing with the radionuclide. So that's our real key secret sauce, basically, for the way we've been able to go forward as quickly as we have. So, we believe that, monazite is a known, really significant source of rare earths. And the problem has been dealing with radionuclides. China is currently processing monazite sands, and we are currently processing monazite sands in the United States. So really challenges, we need to be able to establish our ability to separate into oxides, which is the next step. We need to secure more monazite sands, but it's a very exciting spot for our company. And, we plan to emerge as a material significant world producer at some of the lowest cost, probably lower quartile in the space, particularly outside of China.
Great, thank you for that, Mark. Clint, I think coming back to comments also made by Chris, I understand that China sort of at the moment controls around about 80% rather of global production supply. And the West is obviously, and Chris made a very valid point there in terms of some of the critical REs used in defense systems, for instance. Where is the West looking? Where, or Western countries, should I say, or maybe I should say outside of China in that respect, where are they looking for alternate sources? Where are the key areas, the jurisdictions around the world where either the deposits are being identified or actually mines actually being developed? Hello, Clint, are you?
Yep, sorry, I just muted there. So where are they being developed? Pretty much everywhere, right? So I think South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, Russia. I would say some of the places that they're not being developed are Europe, not so much, a little bit in Europe, but it's very difficult to get things up and running in Europe. So I would say, there's some stuff happening there. Right now, Canada and Australia are kind of the leaders. That's not just because of their markets with, you've got the ASX there, and you've got obviously the venture exchange. These are sources of a lot of exploration companies. But then you also have the realization, as Mark has pointed out, that mineral sands are a viable opportunity here. So a lot of those heavy mineral sands, HMS companies have been looking at this. So that's, South Africa, Brazil, throughout Australia, Southeast Asia, a lot of places. So I think there are a lot of new places to look and a lot of old places to look. So there's plenty out there. But as Chris also pointed out, it's also difficult to make this, an economically viable venture. So that's what makes this so rare.
And Clint, following on from that, I'd maybe like to talk about, and I wouldn't want to pin you down on any prices here, but where are your thoughts in terms of the markets, say, are going in the short to medium term? I would make the presumption for the demand is only going to increase as we increasingly electrify and decarbonize our planets, and they become more important for their uses in, as you pointed out there, in the magnets for, say, electric vehicles or wind turbines, etc. Cell phones. Technology is not going to go away anytime soon. So where would you say the price is going to be heading? And maybe if you could be as bold, possibly to even make some tentative projections on prices going forward?
Yeah, so I'll speak more to the factors that affect the prices, because I think in this industry, predicting a price is a fool's errand. I think I've seen everybody get obliterated with their predictions. So I'll stick to the factors. So number one right now is COVID. So COVID has been affecting supply chains. COVID has been affecting things like supply from Myanmar to China, which is a primary source of heavy rare earths to China right now. So they're looking for all kinds of other things. That's put pressure on trying to source monazites, which have, a pretty decent heavy rare earth consistency. So I think COVID has been big. The next one is global GDP. So right now, for some reason, we've had a good recovery, and, the global GDP is doing okay. When global GDP tanked back in 2008, that had an immense effect on the rare earth market. So I think as you look at some of these bigger factors, those are really big right now, COVID and global GDP. But then you're looking at things like IRMA and this project in Europe where they're trying to reconstitute the supply chain for magnets inside Europe. So that may have some effect. Australia said, hey, we're going to offer, some government money. There's $2 billion on offer there. the US has said, we're going to commit some money. You know, and then you have things like MP Materials, Linus, Iluka, Energy Fuels, and a whole slew of juniors, you know, many of which are led by companies, you know, such as Chalmers there, where they've been at this for 10 years plus. You know, some of these companies that started in 2010, 11, they've stayed with it. And those are the companies that are really interesting to watch now. So when we get to these prices, I would say when prices get too high, there's a real fear that there will be substitution. We saw this in 2010 and 11. There was a lot of substitution. So I think that that is possible. Even when you get to things like magnets, although it's not as effective, you can switch, let's say in electric vehicles, you can go from permanent magnet drivetrains to induction motors. You can switch. It's just slower, longer to charge, not as powerful. You know, you lose some of the features, but that just depends on what kind of price you're willing to pay. You know, the other thing is, what are the volumes that are going to be needed? You know, I think when you look at some of the surveys that have been out there, you know, and both Chris and Mark know this very well. You're looking at somewhere between 3 to 10 times the amount of rare earths that are going to be needed by 2030 to 2040 in that time frame, if we actually continue on the trajectory with electric vehicles, with wind turbines, with basically making everything smaller, lighter, faster, stronger, and hitting these ESG goals. So yeah, there's a lot of effect there. I think end users are going to be willing to pay more for ESG supply chains, for things where they can track and trace every part of this and say, this is clean. And this is the carbon footprint. I think those are going to be factors that affect price. How's that? Maybe that's no number in there, but that's the effects.
No, that's all right, Chris. I wasn't expecting a number there. I was fishing more than anything else, I guess. Chris, I'm sure you've got some opinions on this as well. Maybe you could sort of take off where Clint ended there in terms of some of the major factors affecting the market, and obviously as the dedicated RAE miner, I'd be interested in your views on this as well. Where you see the markets going, where the supply demand curves are going to be.
Well, I completely agree with everything Clint just said there, but when he mentions the AC induction motor, all I can say is that think of those occasions of a burning Tesla. Tesla came to market at the height of the last set of rare earth element prices, which were ridiculously high, which were caused by China cutting off all supply to Japan for 6 to 8 weeks, the Senkaku boat incident. And so specifically, what was probably the most important of the 4 magnet feed rare earth elements at that time was dysprosium, and it went from approximately $90 a kilo to $3,000 a kilo in a matter of months. That did touch off about 6 years of the drive R&D globally for substitutions. And we do have another factor here now, in terms of specifically dysprosium, where it is much less important to the manufacture of permanent magnets than it once was. Whereas in 2009, approximately 13% of a permanent magnet was dysprosium, it's only approximately 1% in most recipes right now. And that outstanding 12% was picked up by the other rare earth elements, terbium, neodymium, and praseodymium. And in specifics for those prices, the prices for those last 3 I just mentioned are arguably at the highest point they have been in the last 10 years. They are certainly the highest they have been in 2021 after what was a significant price spike in Q1 2021, and then a fall off in Q2, which really didn't mean that, well, it meant that everybody had overbought really arguably in Q1. So in terms of the AC induction motor, that creates so much stress on the lithium ion battery. That arguably is why you had those instances of burning electric vehicles. And so with the DC permanent magnet motor, I don't know of any cars that have caught fire from that style of a drive motor. In terms of where prices may be going, there is an analyst out of Geneva who talks about a demand shock, and Clint referenced that as well. And from the current trajectory, from what everyone sees in terms of analysts of the space, I would agree with that. And to go back to the previous session, you know, what Candace McPherson said about governments, you know, governments need to do more, arguably. I mean, so many governments like to leave it to the private sector, but Eddie Greenspan, in his idea that the public markets will, sort themselves out, that didn't work so well in 2007 and 2008. So arguably, with every other country in the world, not subsidizing the development of these critical projects, such as China has always done. I mean, even what is purported to be the lower processing cost in China, sure, maybe lower labor costs, but ultimately, what is that number? If you take out the state subsidies from the rare earth element industry in China, where is the actual, production costs? And so, yes, I totally agree that there needs to be more material and arguably more government support. In fact, what Clint referenced quickly there, IRMA, that's the acronym for the European Raw Material Alliance. And yes, they have a huge budget. And yes, their intent is to create essentially a vertically integrated magnet manufacturing industry in the European Union, with Vacuum Schmelz producing more magnets for all of the European car manufacturers, ideally, and everyone else. But at the end of the day, they need feedstock. And so it's really new raw material sources that are needed.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was a wonderful response, Chris. And I think there's a lot of information to unpick in that. Mark, I'd like to come back to you, which I think also follows on from what we were saying there. When we're looking for new resources, energy fuels, you're the major producer of energy, of uranium and vanadium, that we mentioned earlier on, and you're also looking now to reestablish these supply chains for rare earth elements in the US. What's Energy Fuels' strategy now to moving forward? I wonder if you could talk to that for a moment in terms of meeting this increased demand for rare earth elements.
Yeah, well, look, we're just providing an alternative to China on the monazite sands, and we could, augment that with other sources of rare earths in time, but our focus is to build the book on monazite sands at a material scale, establish separation as quickly as we can, show the market that it can be done in the United States at high world standards, responsibly and at low cost. I mean, so we're going to drive our own bus here, and I think we're making great progress. And I think a number of people are taking notice of the actions that we're taking and the speed that we're moving. And we're gonna play our own game here, but we are very excited of where we're going, and we plan to be, as I said, a material world supplier at very low cost.
Fantastic. And Mark, if I could maybe ask you if you could speak to for a moment, and Chris touched on this in terms of government support. We know the Chinese government will be very supportive of their mining sector, and particularly when it comes to what we would class as critical strategic minerals. I wonder if you could maybe, what would you suggest that maybe North American governments, I think obviously Canadian and US governments, what could they do more, or if they could do more to support that now that nascent reestablishment of the RE supply chains in North America?
Yeah. Well, in our case, we don't think we really need any monetary government support. I mean, if we can get it, we'll take it. But in our case, we just need more monazite sands. We can process more monazite sands right now if we have more monazite. And working with some of our allies, there is an immense amount of monazite that's buried around the world right now that was discarded because it couldn't be addressed. Those sources are also key opportunities for companies like us. So, from our perspective, Energy Fuels, we want monazite sands, and we want a lot of it as soon as we can get it.
I think that's a pretty clear message there. Thanks, Mark. We're just sort of coming to the end of the panel discussion. We move into some really interesting questions we've got from our delegates. But I'd like to just maybe, Clint, come back to you for one last question before we come into take some questions from the audience. We've had a number of names mentioned there, and they do have some wonderful names of rare earth elements. But I wonder if you could maybe talk to some of the key ones that we should be looking out for in the future of these 15 or 17 elements.
Yeah, I mean, I think right off the bat, in both, Chris and Mark, I think have pointed to this, but it's the magnetics, right? So neodymium, praseodymium, known as NdPr in the industry. So NdPr are really important for neodymium iron boron magnets. So those are critical. And then in order for those magnets to have really high coercivity, to be able to retain their magnetic properties at high temperatures, they need dysprosium and terbium. So those four, neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, terbium, those are kind of the linchpin of the magnetic market. And the magnetic market really for rare earths is, upwards of 80% of the rare earth market by value. So I think those are the ones to watch. But what's really interesting is there are a plethora of different applications that use small amounts of the other rare earths or use significant amounts that maybe aren't really well known. I think lanthanum is an easy one to point to, as you do fluid cracking catalysts is what basically allows us to use gasoline and all the other things in oil. That's all rare earths. So that's lanthanum for the most part. So there's a lot of other uses out there, but I think it's those four that are the key right now.
Great, terrific. Thank you, Clint. I'm now going to move into some of the questions we've got from the delegates here, and there's quite a few of them, so I'm going to just methodically go through them. We've got a question coming in, and maybe I'll leave it up to the panel here to decide who maybe want to jump into this one. But how important will the Saskatchewan Research Council rare earth elements processing facility to be to the North American RE supply chain or the development of such a supply chain? Maybe Mark, you might be the most appropriate person to jump in on that.
So you're talking about the Saskatchewan Research Council facility or the construction of it? Look, and I think that it's a step. It's a step, and I think everybody has to take a step. And I think it shows, Saskatchewan's, moving forward. I mean, a lot of what they're planning to do is what we're planning to do. I think our scale is going to be larger, but I think the skill sets required to go for full integration, typically have to be in steps. There's been some sort of rocky history in the past with people trying to move too quickly, and I think the Saskatchewan Resource Council is trying to take those steps with some of the expertise they have. So, it's not going to all come back in a day or a week. It takes time to get the momentum back, and it has to be a priority. And finally, after all this ran off to China, it's becoming a priority. With this focus on electrification, reducing carbon emissions, and efficiency. So, I think it's an important step.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. We've got another question coming in, and maybe Clint, I'll ask you to jump in on this one. It's also related to the monazite sands. One of our delegates has asked that he was aware that some years ago a deposit had been located in Spain. I wonder if that's something that you're aware of and you might be able to speak to in terms of the fate of that particular deposit.
Yeah, so there's several monazite sands prospects in both Spain and Portugal. And, they're not large by volume. They're not really a huge deposit, at least from the data that was out there earlier. So, yeah, I mean, are these possible? Should these be looked at? Absolutely, they should be looked at. Are they imminent? I don't think they're imminent. I think it's going to be a lot more difficult to get things started. And actually in Spain, there's been some pushback. So we'll just have to see. I think, I think they're interesting. They're worth following. But right now, I wouldn't say that they're front burner or about to happen. I think there's, but a lot of interest is picking up.
Thanks, man. Chris, I'm going to ask you to address this one. An interesting one of questions come up around the importance of recycling of REs and generating new mining facilities. Wonder if there's maybe something you could talk to that for a moment.
Ultimately, the whole concept of sustainability and looking at commodities and resources from cradle to grave is absolutely important for, the continued betterment of planet Earth. However, at this point in time, in basically all cases, as Clint pointed out, in a lot of these applications, the amount of rare earth elements is relatively small, and the actual recycling of them at this point in time seems questionable on the economic side of things. It may be more economic in a country that has lower labor costs, a third world country. In the West here, there are some interesting companies attempting to be active in the recycling of rare earth elements, and I certainly wish them well and hope they may be successful. Because I think fundamentally that is very important to do the best job at using the resources we have and not depleting, even though depleting carbonatite hosted rare earth element resources is pretty unlikely in any of our lifetimes or for the next several generations. But using these resources as best we can, yes, recycling is fundamentally something that definitely should be looked at more.
Great, thanks, Chris. Mark, I'm gonna throw this one to you now as well, because it's American focused again. In terms of the Round Top project in Texas, if you're aware of it, do you see the oversupply production of certain elements such as, say, thorium as a hindrance to other rare earth element production?
Well, I think, it can be. I mean, that's been a limiting factor for, a lot of the rare earth producers, even those that are not, seeking out monazite, basanite, it can truncate an operation because you don't have the ability to deal with the uranium or the thorium, even if it's at low levels. So look, it's something I think everybody is aware of, certainly in the rare earth business. And, as I said, the White Mesa Mill is a existing facility that has 40 years of history of dealing with radionuclides and the licenses and permits and ability to recover the uranium. And we're looking to recover the thorium. That's just a differentiator for us. But, all projects have to look at, what their feeds are and how they're going to address various elements that are contained in those feeds.
And Mark, I'd like to stay with you for a moment as well, because there's a question that had come up, and Chris alluded to the comments. But a question was asked: when would you, or do you have any views on when the commerce would come into production?
When that's a question
Yes.
for me. When are we going to come to commercial production?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're already at small commercial right now, making rare earth carbonate. If we have more monazite feeds, we can ramp that up to several thousand tons a year right now. But we really need to have that full integration, the separation, to get the economics of scale and get the value adds. We've got a very good relationship with NEO and Constantine Karyanopoulos. We're shipping to Estonia right now because there is no separation in the United States. But to get to big scale for us, we're looking out about 3 years, and in 3 years, I'm talking, it's my goal to hopefully be in that 10,000 tons a year REO or greater, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Thank you. Also, another question has come up, back to the government support again, which is quite a key issue, and a number of delegates have brought this up. Mark, I don't want to monopolize too much of your time there. Maybe Clint, I'd ask you to maybe jump in on this one. What do you think would be the sort of key elements, say, the governments could do to, and I think it's particularly in Western governments and specifically, say, North American governments, to reestablish that domestic rare earth element supply chain? Leave it completely alone and let the market sort out themselves, or is there specific activities or policies that you think they could instigate or initiate in order to get that reestablishment of the supply chains in North America?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of things that government can do. One of the things that you always have to be careful of is picking winners and losers. That's always a difficulty. So, I mean, there's some things out there right now as far as, tax rebates and, basically things that you can get for mining. These are all prospective. They're not necessarily all, made into law yet, but, looking at tax rebates for mining, looking at tax rebates for magnet manufacture, looking for a variety of ways of encouraging folks to get to production. The problem is you kind of have to cover the whole supply chain at once to make this make sense, right? So you need to go from the mine to oxides, to metals, alloys, magnets, motors, components, assemblies. It's a very difficult supply chain to replace. So when the government's looking at this, they're taking some steps right now, which I think are good, such as, hey, let's put in a demonstration facility that goes from soup to nuts, and at least we can start training some people so that when we get the domestic supply chain back, we have some folks that are trained in how to do this. So I think education is an important an important factor. I think there's a lot of different ways. I'm always happy to talk offline on this stuff. There's multiple ways to do this, none of which are easy.
Thank you. And a question I've got on my own, actually. We talk quite a lot about, obviously, the should we say, the dispersed nature of them, and the fact that rare earth elements are often found with other minerals. Is the approach very much, and maybe Clint, I'll stick with this one, with yourself for this one, and open it up to Chris and Mark to jump in as well. And in terms of, is it economic? It would appear at the moment, if I'm right in saying that it may not necessarily be economic to mine them on their own. However, what are the other key elements? And I know Mark has talked about uranium and vanadium being two, but what are the other maybe key elements that come along to make that the case more economic for mining our rare earth elements?
So I think, Mark did speak to this, and I think, even Chris's, as they look at, all kinds of different products, coming out of ashram, I think it's important to look at what are your byproducts, and byproduct production is very important. Heavy mineral sands, which is targeting other minerals, has become a great provider of monazite, but you also have, areas to look at like phosphates or bauxites or things like that have historically been looked at for byproduct production. If you just think about Bayan-Obo, which is in China, as Chris pointed out, that's a huge portion, 45% of world production, and that's iron ore byproduct. So there's a lot of different products that can be looked at. I know they've looked at it in the copper mining industry. I know that they've looked at it in both gold and silver. So like it has been looked at, and there are possibilities, but once again, it comes down to economics. It always comes down to economics. And one previous thing to point out about the government thing, just a final point on that is, we need to spend a lot more money quickly if we're going to catch up with China. So they've been subsidizing at a very large scale for decades. And for us to catch up, it's going to have to be monumental, not small.
Excellent. And maybe Chris, coming back to your, and as Clint alluded to there, your two mines, or your two deposits rather, rare earth element deposit in Canada, the Ashram rare earth in fluorspar in Quebec, and the Fur Tantalum and Niobium deposit at Blue River in British Columbia. Maybe we could talk a little bit about at what stage you are with those projects.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy. I mean, first off, tantalum and niobium are not rare earth elements. They are rare metals, and economic deposits of tantalum may be even rarer than rare economic deposits of rare earth elements. And so we're very excited by, I would say, increased interest in our Blue River tantalum and niobium project coming from two sides, which would be increased anxiety from majors over their position in terms of ESG principles, and then also a falling production amounts from Central Africa, the DRC, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi over the last 3 or 4 years. But in terms of our ashram rare earth element and fluorspar deposit, we are very fortunate in that we have a very significant fluorspar byproduct. That would be the probably the most valuable byproduct from the ashram deposit. The average of the total resource would be about 7% fluorspar, which would never be a standalone fluorspar deposit, but as a byproduct, it should potentially add anywhere from $30 to $40 million of additional revenue per year from the current production scenario. As well, there is probably a niobium byproduct as well. And that brings me around back to the top of the circle, where to say that, again, carbonatite-hosted deposits dominate the production of rare earth elements globally, always have. And niobium is also completely dominated by carbonatite-hosted projects, such as the Araxá deposit in Brazil, which produces 80% of the entire world's market. It's a carbonatite. So in terms of the ashram, we are very fortunate to be monazite dominant, and then to have enough of the terbium and dysprosium to have, on balance, one of the highest distributions of the 4 magnet feeds that, as Clint pointed out, are so essential and so highly valued in the market right now. And then we have this significant fluorspar byproduct, and then also a potential niobium byproduct.
Chris, I'm going to stick with you just for one more question, and I think it's an interesting one, and it comes back down to what we're talking about with the government support or what support mechanisms out there. To your knowledge, are there any funds out there that are available to support the development of REEs or the value chains associated with their extraction?
Well, first, let me say there are a couple of funds out there. Van Eck has a rare earth element ETF, and then there's a fund out of Geneva that is literally called the REE Fund, run by a very good fund manager and analyst named Laurent Kroll. But they don't necessarily do any support directly of rare earth element projects. But I would like to make one point, if I could, in so much as the Canadian government and the Quebec government have been very significant supporters of the rare earth elements sector in Quebec and in Canada, respectively. And the current program of rare earth element optimization that has been running for the last 6 years has just basically reached its conclusion. But there has been a new and much increased budget from Canada for this rare earth element optimization program. And so that is, I would say, a very good start by the Canadian government, and also to mention the subsidies from the Quebec government. That capital doesn't go directly to the company per se, but it then finances the work being done at NRCan, Canmat Mining, University of Laval, et cetera, respectively. And that is very admirable, I would say.
Fantastic. Chris, many thanks. There are lots of other questions, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it the other day. I see our illustrious leader has appeared on the screen there, Anthony, and that's a nod to say, Chris, Clint, Mark, many thanks indeed for a fascinating and amazing discussion. There's so much you've covered there in such a relatively short period of time. As we just chatted earlier, we could talk about this for several days, no longer just a sort of 45 minutes. But again, many thanks indeed for joining us today. Very much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Carl.
Thank you.
Thank you to each and every one of you. We had a high anticipation of this discussion, and you all delivered on it in spades. Thank you for all of your time and your insights. Cheers. Thank you, Carl.
Anthony.